If release dates mean anything these days, and personally that's not a hill I would like to die on, then on the 8th of August this year we can look forward to sinking our teeth into Mafia, the Old Country, a prequel that will transport us to the underworld of 1900 Sicily. Now obviously it's been a while since there was a Mafia release, 5 years if you count the definitive editions, and if you don't count those, about 9 years since we last had an original Mafia story. So, in anticipation for this game, I thought I'd do the unthinkable and play this one. Mafia 3 has long been viewed as this series' odd one out. It tried to do something different to Mafia 1 and 2, and as you can imagine, the reception as a result was not especially ideal, with its initial reception being quite mixed and disposition towards this game remaining relatively consistent to this day. So naturally I wanted to fire the game up and entertain the question, was Mafia 3 really that bad? Now, I'm aware many people will flock to the comments to simply say yes, end of, without even watching the video because the title brings out their inner rebel a bit like watching the title screens for Bob the Builder. But if you'd humour me, I'd like to utilise this key question to explore this game's positives and negatives. Because, in my opinion, the answer is not straightforward at all. There are genuine redeeming qualities in this game that made me enjoy playing it, and yet for every single one of these, there are at least 2 things that made me want to evaluate my will to live. But you know what, I played it feeling fresh. After a weekend away soul-searching on a boat in a lead mine, I found myself in a good headspace to receive a game comprised mostly of repetitive open-world activities, and I've got to say I didn't find it unbearably arduous. There are of course mitigating factors that skew my opinion a bit here, for instance, the lead. I'd also recently replayed Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and that gives Purgatory a new definition. But nonetheless, here we are. Please enjoy the Mafia 3 chapter of my descent into madness. So to begin with, this game was a noticeable departure from the Mafia format. Mafia 1 took us to the 1930s Chicago-inspired streets of Lost Heaven, where we assumed the role of an Italian-American taxi driver named Tommy Angelo. Thrust into the world of organised crime, we join him as he rises the ranks in the Salieri family. It didn't look like this, by the way, this is obviously the definitive edition. And then Mafia 2 tells the story of Vito Scaletta, an Italian-American World War II veteran, who returns home to a life of crime on the streets of the 1940s and 50s New York-inspired city of Empire Bay, during a time when this sort of business was at its peak. Both titles are heavily inspired by gangster films of the likes of Goodfellas and The Godfather, so as you can imagine the games prioritised mature, rich storytelling, and while both games had a fully realised open-ish world, the narrative was linear in delivery with missions rolling into one another, so that while you can free roam to an extent, they aren't open world games, at least not really, instead prioritising intensive, packed narrative beats. But Mafia 3 wanted to shift away from this linear nature. We're brought to the 1960s New Orleans-inspired streets of New Bordeaux, where inequality and segregation is rampant, and we play as one on the disadvantaged end of that inequality, Lincoln Clay, a Dominican-American orphan and Vietnam veteran, who returns home just in time to watch his adopted family get betrayed and massacred by the Mafia. And arguably, that's less than ideal. By some miracle, he survives being shot in the head and recovers to embark on a revenge mission. And oh boy, is Marcano gonna regret pissing this man off, because as it turns out, Lincoln is a turbocharged monstrous action hero. Anyway, this plot unleashes us on the streets of New Bordeaux in the first actual open world game in the Mafia series. Yes, you could technically free roam in the other games, but it wasn't truly the purpose of the world. In Mafia 3, the world space is more than a backdrop, it's the vessel for content. As a setting, it's functional and atmospheric. Much like the previous titles, it told a story, all of its own. It's a hot, humid, swampy city in the deep south. The city is vast and diverse, yet fraught with corruption, organised crime, and high racial tension. So you'll hear that word a lot, arguably an English teacher's wet dream. Anyway, cruising the streets of New Bordeaux can be satisfying, unless you look at the rearview mirror while driving. In that case, it's a portal to the PlayStation 2 era, which makes it hard to appreciate the game's visual aesthetic. The sky is expressive, the lighting potent, sometimes a tad too potent as to burn your retinas out, but you get the point. Overall, New Bordeaux is aesthetically pleasing and atmospheric. But does it go far enough in expressing its charm? Does this world space feel alive? If you ask me, that's a much trickier question to answer. Because to truly convince somebody in an open world, you need to have a reason to linger in it, an excuse to slow down and soak it in, rather than rush to the next objective to get it done. And this is where the game's big issue starts to creep in. The presence of an open world is not what makes an open world game, as odd as that sounds. That's why Mafia 1 and 2 you could hardly consider open world games. They do have an open world space that you could cruise around for no reason if you wanted to, but there's no downtime. You're always in a mission of some variety, you always have a narrative objective on display, and that keeps you on track and discourages you from seeking out side content that just isn't there, allowing you to instead soak it in for what it is, the setting, allowed to thrive through the mutual understanding that you're always on task. Actual open world games like Mafia 3 don't possess that inherent focus. The storytelling has to make an allowance for the fact that you're going to take off and spend a couple of hours at a time engaging in less story-intense content, and the world has to offer a departure from those beats satisfying enough to justify you bothering. Failure to accomplish the latter in particular has a tendency to result in an open world that feels like it exists for the sake of it, and degrading an experience's concision for no reason at all isn't an awfully graceful thing to do. Mafia 3 falls into the category of being an open world game for the sake of it. To Hangar 13's credit, that was kind of the craze when this game released in 2016. There was a certain connotation for the experience being grander if it offered an open world experience, and when done right they offer a sense of freedom, agency, immersion, all a cut above more linear experiences. You don't just become invested in the main character's story, you become the character. And this is true regardless of whether or not there is actually a character to become, because you're not just playing their story, you're living their lives, from the big events to the small ones. So there is ultimately an element of justification for the industry hard-on for open world games, before you even factor their very format's potential to monumentally increase replay value. These games suck you in with the storytelling as a jumping off point, and it's up to you how much you engage with the periphery, be a constantly fed vindication for having done so as it enriches the game. The attention to detail encourages you to linger, to soak it in. Your progression through these stories is tailored to you because you have control over how you exercise it, often to pick and choose what activities you enjoy and what you're indifferent towards. That very real sense of adventure is an incredibly powerful thing, something that makes for one hell of a marketing pitch, and when it's executed properly, the results stand in a league of their own as the game grips the player for not dozens but hundreds of hours. No matter how many fantastic linear or semi-linear games there are out there, and there are countless, very few can hope to boast the same. That's not to argue that they're trying to, nor am I trying to say that open world games are better and linear games are not as valid, because that couldn't be further from the truth. But what I am trying to say is, why wouldn't you make Mafia fully open world? The prior games already had the key characteristic in the fully realised world space, so the veil was arguably thinner for Mafia than other franchises that have gone this route and seen considerable success having done it. So on paper, Mafia 3 seems like a great idea. But a great idea needs to be rivaled by its own execution, or it falls flat. Sadly, Mafia 3 implemented the open world, and then it feels like it's playing catch-up for having to make an allowance for it. And this is made clear when the gameplay premise of the story opens up. Because, if I'm being entirely honest, I actually like Lincoln's story. I think he's a compelling character. The opening sees him return home a war hero. We enter his life as he re-enters it. We're exposed to his adoptive familial dynamic with Ellis and Sammy. We see him rejoining the community he left behind. A large, extended family, pleased to see this orphan home and safe. But obviously this is the start of the game, things aren't going good. Alongside reconnecting with his community, Lincoln's got to sort out some family trouble. Trouble that leads him to the Marcano crime family. At first, they seem like allies. Together, they plan and execute a heist. The job goes well enough and all characters involved appear to now be swimming in money, enough to resolve Sammy's problems. But then of course the Marcano lot betray Lincoln and his family, killing his best mate Ellis and Sammy, brutally ripping away the life Lincoln had returned to. It's just like the gentleman at the start of the story said to Lincoln, just because you're home from war doesn't mean you're back. And naturally, following the events that transpired in the opening, Lincoln's demeanour shifts to a simmering rage. He vows to excruciatingly destroy Sal Marcano, dismantling his organisation bit by bit. He's not interested in street justice, nor the simple act of killing. He wants Sal Marcano to feel what he feels. This opening is compelling. You could argue revenge stories are kind of generic, but they are reliable. But despite this narrative's incredibly awkward retrospective framing, where the storytelling is interspersed with recountings from the future, that scrambles events and perhaps creates something of an inconsistent pacing, the opening is still of a quality that sucks you in. It establishes a premise that's interesting at least for the Mafia series. In this game, we're not working our way up a crime family. Our objective is to brutally and precisely rip one apart. Lincoln's not motivated by the good life here. He's going to war, and God help anyone who gets in his way. The opening is densely packed, and that concision frankly crumbles the moment we're properly released into the open world bulk of the game. Because from here, with the aid of his CIA jack-of-all-trades man in the chair, John Donovan, Lincoln must garner powerful allies. Cassandra, the leader of the Haitian mob. An older Vito Scaletta. If he needs an introduction, I really don't know what to say to you. In this game, he's the leader of the nondescript Italian gang. And then there's Thomas Burke, the classic Irish stereotype. And he's the drunken leader of the Irish mob. He's gruff, reckless, ill-tempered and volatile, belligerent and fierce. It's probably not a good idea to split hairs about stereotyping in a franchise about primarily Italian Americans being gangsters, but come on. Anyway, back to the point. Together, through the power of friendship, we're tasked with taking districts by undermining various criminal rackets, and we do this by doing a monetary value in damage, typically achieved through reasonably bland open world stuff. Go to X location, kill people, interrogate thugs to obtain information in a way where no information is actually exchanged, kill more people, destroy merchandise with a crowbar that Lincoln's just carrying in his pocket, pick the odd lock here and there, and you guessed it, kill more people. From the moment you start doing this, this becomes the bulk of the game, the main content. It's not narratively challenging, because this open plan approach does not complement storytelling awfully well. So instead, at key moments you get flash forwards to the future, where events are recounted. You're sent on an ungodly slog to do generic things multiple times over in a single district, and there are 9 districts. And the storytelling on display that demands this decompresses, so there's no tightly packed plot points. 80 to 90% of the time you're following a general objective to do damage, and that's it. I won't pretend these districts don't come to a head with actual storytelling, they do. The individual racket confrontations tend to prove to be a dud, where you often revisit locations you've already shot up in your pursuit to do damage, and just do more by killing the leader of the racket. But these chapters tend to end with an actual mission where you take on the district's leader, and these have a tendency to be a bit more story intense, and better yet, actually unique. These points in the game make you wonder why more of it isn't like this. It's clearly not through a lack of ability, as otherwise there wouldn't be moments like this at all. But the hour to 2 hour interim between these moments can be awfully frustrating, as the story beats now have to deliver a payoff for 2 hours of next to nothing, or at least what feels like nothing. And that's a big ask, a bigger ask than is reasonable. Like I said, I like this game's story, the individual moments are good, but the bulk of the gameplay in between is dull and unengaging. So you've got to put up with a lot to bounce from beat to beat. What's the knock-on effect for the open world though? Well, the main content in an open world game is the advertisement for the side content, for engaging in more than is required to finish the experience. If the main story makes you crave less, not more, are you likely to seek out more? No. Because the content you have to do sets a precedent that nothing else is worth doing, otherwise it would be the primary content. And when you take into consideration just how much of the world the main content exposes you to without making you think, you could very much so be forgiven for believing it doesn't have much else to offer. The immersive value crumbles when you feel as if sticking around is wasting your time, so you just dart from racket objective to racket objective, district to district, in hopes getting familiar with the repetitive gameplay loop enables you to become so good at the game you can start making up the difference between how much time the game takes and how much time the game is worth. All of this because the main mission structure is largely non-existent. They're all just solitary objectives crammed into a vague bracket for you to complete at your leisure. At the best of times, this is middling side content. It doesn't feel purposeless outright, as naturally there would be a lot of this in undermining a city-wide mafia, but neither does it feel purposeful. If anything, it artificially makes the actual story less engaging because you're more likely to forget one plot point before you move on to the next one, and you're less enthused to interact with any side activities because if the main content can't at least hit the bar of enthralling you somewhat, how likely is the side content to be better, or at least any different? And sure enough, the activities aren't all that interesting. There are optional loyalty missions for your underbosses where they send you to do more of vaguely similar stuff, I suppose. While it can offer some character insight at the start and end of the entire kerfuffle, the process doesn't stand out especially. It's the same go here, do one thing format, rinse repeat, such as bouts of sourcing 3 of identical cars for the IRA because Burke asks us to, and that would be dull alone, but they also have a tendency to respawn exactly where you found the last one, and I don't know if that makes it worse or just a bit funny. The actual gameplay loop on offer here though is quite dull, in general especially, but also by comparison to the rest of the gameplay, and that's an accomplishment. The loyalty missions for Vito typically involve interrogating and then killing people, which I suppose isn't the worst for an action game, especially considering how fun the actual gameplay systems can be to play around with. I don't know about Cassandra, I kind of killed her before I could find out. Then there are the trafficking missions where you do things, usually jackknifing lorries into inescapable positions halfway back, but the basic premise is you retrieve some goods and it increases your underboss's income and by extension your kickback. These missions boil down to going to places, fighting some blokes the same as what you do for most of the game, and then just stealing the vehicle which has the goods aboard it. There are also collectibles dotted about the city. Can I be bothered finding footage for that? Not really. And if you like the driving, you have the races. It's kind of the same as racing in every other game it crops up in, you just kind of race. You complete a circuit for a number of laps, or you do a point-to-point race, and I'm not going to lie, these are incredibly easy. The actual street races are perhaps a tad more challenging as they actually factor traffic, but even still, if you cock it up, you can always reset, restarting the race so you can go again. And you are rewarded for winning, or at least finishing third out of 4, so to result in no rewards whatsoever, you have to be outclassed by 3 reasonably cooked NPCs. Beyond that, you do of course have the DLC storylines that, from what I've played, are actually kind of good. Their own gameplay loop is much more story focused, therefore they're more compact, more followable if you will. Stones Unturned focuses on our CIA friend John Donovan, and basically we've got to help him track down a nuclear warhead and save the world a bit. Essentially, Mafia does a Fast and Furious. This DLC offers more storytelling to go alongside its senseless violence, even if that plot is so detached from anything you could associate with the word Mafia that it would give the Assassin's Creed games a run for their money in the department of ditching brand identity for the sake of being cool. That being said, at the core of it, Lincoln's just helping out his buddy, who assumes the role of more than just a provider of information and resources as seen in the base game. So you come away more convinced of their dynamic and history, and that's value within itself.
I don't mean to pry, but you mind telling me who just flew off with the nuke?
Oh, it's Gary. He's a great guy, you'd love him.
Oh, Gary. Who the fuck is Gary?
Sign of the Times focuses chiefly on Lincoln and Father James, and they find themselves investigating a drugged-up blood cult operating within New Bordeaux. It's a darker, more mysterious chapter than the base game familiarises us with, and I find it awfully fascinating even if the organised crime element to a point does take a back seat. I mean, you could definitely say a cult wouldn't be good news for a criminal enterprise, neither would mutually assured destruction come to think of it, so it fits logically even if not tonally nonetheless. I really enjoyed this expansion. The gameplay is just far more interesting interspersed with this kind of storytelling, and the same of course goes for the aforementioned Stones Unturned expansion. And finally, there's the Faster Baby DLC that takes us to an entirely new portion of the map, a rural community nearby to New Bordeaux named Sinclair Parish, where a racist sheriff named Slim Beaumont is effectively persecuting, if not outright murdering, people of colour. So Lincoln makes some new mates, and embarks on a mission to expose Sheriff Beaumont for his crimes. We get a new region to explore, new activities to partake in, new characters to familiarise ourselves with, and narrative themes relevant to the time period the base game would have done well to explore more. And these expansions certainly serve as positives for the game, especially in the Definitive Edition bundle, as you get all 3. But in the context of when the game and these DLCs initially released, having the storytelling and gameplay only achieve harmony in the DLC is a ridiculous move. You'd be incredibly hard-pressed to reflect fondly on this, even if it's not so much of an issue if you bought the game, say, today. Because you have to wonder what the plan was there. If players find the base game's gameplay loop to be tedious tripe, who's going to actively seek out more of it? Better yet, who's going to pay for more of it? You see, while I'd certainly make the argument the DLCs aren't more of it, that's absolutely where the standard was set, and the expectations likely were. Mafia 3 did the opposite to putting its best foot forward, but there were good steps eventually. So Mafia 3 doesn't completely lack for good game qualities, and that's before you factor making your own fun, banging the radio on and going for a drive in the rain. But to balance the point a bit, just because Mafia 3's gameplay is typically quite repetitive, doesn't mean it's not fun, that it can't be satisfying. Because it is. The shooting mechanics are quite smooth and I enjoy using them. The challenge is quite reasonably balanced. You can't sit there and soak up bullets, you have to use cover systems. You have to monitor your health. You have to use adrenaline shots to heal and look out for body armor. The game could get on top of you incredibly quickly if you go in guns blazing and pretend you're the Terminator. There's less leeway for getting hit, and it works quite nicely. Because even though you could in theory drop dead at the drop of a hat, it isn't unbearably difficult, it's just a layer of challenge that ensures you stay, to a degree, mentally involved in what's going on. It doesn't make up for the stimulus deficiencies of the actual mission structure, but it's just smooth, responsive, yet tricky enough to keep you alert. And then of course there's the seamlessness of the hand-to-hand stuff. It's a tad rudimentary, but the takedowns are always satisfying to watch, and their placement makes open combat not your only option. Stealth also proves to be a viable approach, and the takedowns are quite fun to observe. Sure, they aren't too tricky, and the enemy AI's detection perhaps isn't the best, granting you an arguably considerable margin of error, but the overall stealth in this game is surprisingly functional, and you can factor shooting into it with silenced pistols, and throwing knives, though I've never really used them. There's not enough depth to either system to truly be a playstyle as such. Rather, outright combat and stealth are viable tools, but I wouldn't say there's a huge margin for experimentation, so the AI deficiency is certainly noticeable.
Got a cigar.
Good job, chaps. Yeah, the stealth of anything can be quite funny because detection is a bit odd. And when enemy AIs discover bodies, they don't really react to it, they just sort of continue in their neutral routine. But hey, it's better than having the system and having it not work at all. I also like the fact that you can only carry 2 guns at a time. That puts limitations on how much ammunition you have to hand and how much you'll have to find as you go, and in better games it would perhaps put more emphasis on preparation depending on what challenges you anticipate to face. But since the enemy variety is more or less limited to goons, once you find what you're comfortable with, there's really no reason to change it up. And thereafter, combat and stealth scenarios have a tendency to homogenize. As for the driving mechanics, I have no real complaints here. It's a reasonably run-of-the-mill open-world driving system. You have the rear view mirror on the HUD of course, and that's a cool idea perhaps more games should consider. It looks horrendous, but you could see it being useful. Away from that, if you're driving at speed, NPCs will sometimes just dive straight under your car so that you find yourself getting wanted by the authorities. I don't know why they do that, but I noticed it a lot. I also noticed that unlike in Mafia 2, there are no rules of the road that you have to follow, otherwise you'll garner police attention by default. So you can speed, you can run red lights, and you can fail to stop at stop signs as much as you want. The only way you can really garner police attention is if you run somebody over and kill them, or crash into a police car, and I get it, in an open world game those things would get annoying. But for the Mafia games, if anything, it was kind of charming. Stealing cars also only garners attention if you have to smash a window to get in, so you can steal convertibles to your heart's content, and later on in the game you pick the lock instead of smash the window. So overall, this very immersive quality to Mafia 2 in particular is non-existent in 3. And then there's the absence of the fuel management system. Although I'm not mad with that one would genuinely irritate me in an open world game. Particularly one that has you dart about as much as Mafia 3 does. For quality of life in that setup, it makes absolute sense as to why such a feature would be scrapped, but I think if the game didn't compromise its precision so much in making the leap to have an open world, it probably wouldn't have been as big an issue. But hey, without it, it doesn't stand to be an issue at all, does it? Now, as for depth beyond these systems, the underbosses aren't just there for show, and their loyalty is no guarantee either. When we overthrow Rackets, we get to decide which of our underbosses runs the Racket. And once we've taken over an entire district, we get to decide which underboss takes control of that district. And we do this in events called sit-downs, where we sit down with all 3 of our underbosses and make the tough call to allocate the district to whomever we choose. If any of the Rackets are controlled by other underbosses, they don't tend to feel too good about this. You risk them becoming disloyal and you may have to kill them. But if you play your cards right and allocate the Rackets so they're run exclusively by whomever you want the district to later be controlled by, and ensure the number of districts are distributed fairly and evenly, you should be able to keep everybody happy, but I like that it's incredibly easy to absently fail in doing this. It means in this entire process you have to at least use your brain, and not doing so has consequences. If your underboss turns on you, they'll send men after you. The benefits they offer are no longer available until after you've dealt with them, so your hand is forced, you have to go and kill them. It's a solid feature if you ask me. As for the benefits they do offer, well, there are a few. You can order the delivery of cars, you have a contact within the police who can keep the comms quiet while you do crimes, there's the gun van, which is basically just a van full of guns that pulls up vaguely nearby, and you can stock up on weapons, health stuff, explosives and all that. You have somebody who can come take money off your hands and stash it safely away so that when you die you don't lose half of it, which is a really strange feature as you still have access to all of your money when it comes to spending it. So the inconvenience only really exists to irritate you, and the solution is incredibly simple as you can basically do it anywhere at any time, provided there's a road nearby. This system would make a lot more sense if there was an actual reason to keep some money on your person, to balance out the risk of keeping it on your person. But since no such benefit exists, it becomes a system designed to punish absent-mindedness. In a game you really couldn't blame people for being absent while playing. You can also call in some goons to aid you while you're in a fight. It's awfully handy, and while Lincoln at times can feel a bit like a one-man army, it's valuable in moments where you find yourself getting overwhelmed, perhaps even surrounded, because like I said earlier, you aren't a walking tank of health. You know, just general useful stuff. There are of course upgrades to things like health and weaponry, and then there are some customization aspects. For instance, you can customize how Lincoln looks with the variety of outfits. One makes him look like he's cosplaying as Dwayne Johnson. This right here is the pinnacle of manhood. But overall, the gameplay systems perhaps don't possess the depth to truly salvage the mission design, and that's not a knock on the gameplay, rather a knock on the mission design itself. It doesn't complement the gameplay. The gameplay can be really fun, really satisfying, really smooth and fluid, but it feels like a complement to more narrative-driven layouts that just aren't present for much of the game. It hits a certain bar and the gameplay kind of stays there, and that's only really noticeable because there are oftentimes points in the game where that's all there is to notice. The saving grace is it's fun enough, but again it exposes the crucial mission design flaw this game experiences. A flaw that only exists because Mafia 3 wanted to explore the novelty of the open world, something that isn't innately wrong. I still think the idea of an open world Mafia game could be fantastic, I just do not think that Mafia 3 is a fantastic example of it. Because if you're making an open world game, the hard truth is you have to adapt the content to suit it, and you have to adapt the world to suit the content in turn. This is also perhaps why the DLCs offer a much superior experience if you ask me, because in those expansions the novelty of having the open world has been expired. The base game saw to that. All there is left is to add some stories and novel mechanics, and thus the open world aspect to Mafia 3 is no longer heavily prioritised, allowing for gameplay and storytelling to exist in a much tighter setup, like it does fleetingly every now and then in the main game, leading to its strongest moments, where things feel a lot more natural and roll into each other better. But look, let's get to the pinnacle of this video, the conclusion, before it turns into a 2-hour discussion about all sorts of things. Is Mafia 3 a bad game? I wouldn't say it is. Yes, it's considerably weighed down by the execution of the open world format that leads to an awful lot of uninspired content, but there's a story behind all the dead air that wants to be brilliant. Perhaps not orthodox for the Mafia series, but I found Lincoln Clay to be compelling. The gameplay certainly has its moments of enjoyability. Everything is just critically undermined by a format that doesn't draw attention to the game's actual strengths, and that makes it a tricky game to endorse. But look at the moments where the gameplay and storytelling are functioning in tandem. Look at the artistically inspired, albeit a bit unusual, documentary recounting of the events we're partaking in. Ignore the shoehorned in JFK conspiracy bit. Look at the DLCs where the open world is no longer important. They paint the picture of a much stronger game bubbling beneath the surface of the general mediocrity, and that's perhaps what's most frustrating about Mafia 3. It had the potential to not be mediocre, and it doesn't always leave its strengths unrealised. But for the sake of having an open world, it's oversaturated with open world-esque content that prioritises its quantity over its quality, only partially redeemed by not being horrendous to play, and there's certainly a market for this kind of content. Otherwise, companies like Ubisoft would have been dead and buried years ago. But there isn't enough overall to make this game a memorable experience, the experience it deserved to be. In that respect, Mafia 3 frankly deserved far better than it got. Because the better stuff isn't absent, it's just outnumbered by having to do X amount of damage 18 times over. As for the technical area of things, this is another area I've seen Mafia 3 critiqued for. I don't know if I'm just lucky, but I didn't really have much technical problem with this game. There were moments, oh boy were there moments. But nothing that persisted as to cause me grief. I distinctly remember the ground disappearing at me at one point, and that was quite possibly the worst bug, so I'm under the understanding that this game probably does have some technical problems, and I'm sure it was far worse when the game initially released than it is now. But I think Mafia 3's biggest issue is the lack of depth in its open world and the lack of depth in the content it provides, bloating the game considerably and offering nothing in return, rarely striving to exceed its core gameplay, leaving an awful lot on the table of what a fictional proxy of 1960s New Orleans could offer, instead opting to fill our time with 12.5 lots of filler, disproportionately outnumbering the good stuff, making it harder to get invested in the overall experience. That feeling of disappointment intensifies when you realise there's something beneath all of it worth getting invested in. So was Mafia 3 ultimately that bad? No. But it could have been so much better, so much richer and far more varied. Instead, we got what we got, a game that can be enjoyable if you understand what you're in for, but one dwarfed by the potential it failed to realise. As sights turn to Mafia the Old Country, I find myself optimistic. The game's going to be linear, and you'd hope that would mean it wouldn't necessarily fall into the same traps as Mafia 3. But maybe that's also an overcorrection. The open world itself isn't inherently the problem. It's making an open world, and they're not filling it in a way that makes it satisfying to explore, that makes it enjoyable, full of life, lived in, alive. Either way, hopefully, it will be a fantastic game, but to find out if it will be, we'll have to wait and see the long way. But until then, all there is to do is sit around and twiddle our thumbs, I guess. Now, I'd like to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It would be massively appreciated. Of course, only do those things if you want to. Maybe drop me a follow on some social media if you fancy that. And of course, be sure to pepper the comment section with your own opinions. But look, with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please, take care, and goodbye.